For 10 years, the World Happiness Report has been engaging world-renowned scientists to make happiness actually a science. And the purpose of our evening here together is to learn about the new findings, which are incredibly interesting and open the scope and the complexity, but also help us really zero in on what we can and must do to rapidly advance the solutions to the main challenges that we're facing today. So how can the findings of the World Happiness Report be implemented in policymaking and in businesses? We will be discussing that, and we will start with a more focused session on where Italy stands in all this, and then we will open up to a broader perspective. If you're here, it's because you know how interrelated all the issues that we are living today are. And so interconnected are also the solutions. We know that we need new rules, new priorities, and new procedures. So let's start about understanding the term happiness and how it is opened up to include balance, well-being, peace, harmony, words that we might use in our everyday life, but how do they pertain to the 10th edition of this report? And how do they relate to sustainable development? How can they help us foster long-term decision-making when we are so short-term minded, unfortunately, still today? The questions outlined will be discussed in different panels, but let's kick off by giving a very warm welcome to our host, Davide Bollati.
From my side, just welcome to everybody. In Davide's group, we started a journey toward happiness when in 2005 we built our Carta Etica, and in our Carta Etica we have eudaimonia as ultimate goal for our organization. So of course there are different types of happiness, but eudaimonia is a path to life flourishing, I would say. So it's a holistic approach to happiness, and this is, I think, is the right approach to talk about world happiness today. So I'm looking forward to this discussion and share the findings and reflect with all of you about this very holistic fundamental need of humanity and the world.
Thank you. So I would like to call our first speaker, Lara Aknin, who is a Canadian social psychologist and a distinguished professor at the Simon Fraser University. She is associate editor of the World Happiness Report, and in 2014 she published a review addressing the question, does spending money have a positive effect on people's happiness? In 2015, the Canadian Psychological Association granted her with the President's New Researcher Award, and in 2019, she received a grant for her project, Can Repeated and Reflective Giving Nurture Canada's Next Generation of Philanthropists? What's fascinating about everything she's done is how there is a constant relation between these concepts that we still tend to think are generic and actual pragmatic action. And one of her publications is also addressing the question of giving leads to happiness in young children. So Lara will speak to us about the evolution of how we intend and measure happiness, and will also give us a specific insight about Italy. Lara, welcome.
All right. Hi, everyone. Oh, sorry. No problem. Thank you for having me. My name is Lara Aknin, and as mentioned, I'm a social psychologist at Simon Fraser University. I'm also a co-editor of the World Happiness Report. And today I've been asked to speak with you about happiness, what it is, how and why it is we measure it in the World Happiness Report, and how happiness has changed over the past 10, 15 years. Now, to get us started, I'd like us to think about success. What is it, and how do we measure it? How do we know if a person, a neighborhood, or a country is doing well? Well, for years, many nations evaluated the well-being of a country and in turn the well-being of its citizens by measuring gross domestic product, or GDP, which provides an assessment of how much goods and services are produced within a country within a given year. Now, oftentimes, this was thought to predict and be a perfect or imperfect measure of how citizens were doing. Yet, I'd like to argue, and I think many people in this room would now agree, that this is an imperfect proxy for people's well-being reports. In fact, it might be misguided and quite short-sighted, because, as we've come to learn, that money is not a perfect predictor of happiness. In fact, there are many complexities to this relationship, and it's far from perfect. One of the reasons this might be is because some of the benefits that GDP can bring are often unevenly distributed. Many people receive very little, and some people receive quite a bit. And often the pursuit of higher levels of GDP can come at the expense of the environment, which is often a direct and indirect predictor of well-being. In fact, I think a really nice, helpful demonstration of this point can be seen in the Easterland paradox. And this is just one snapshot of data taken from Japan over 30 years. But you can see that levels of production or economic well-being captured here with the red line has increased fourfold over the 30-year period, while life evaluations remained really stable. In fact, if you look at negative emotions during this period or even elsewhere, the picture is even more stark. So as economic success grew, people's negative emotions and experiences were becoming even more challenging. And so this is just to make the point that perhaps economic measures are not a perfect way to assess how a country and its citizens are doing. So if happiness does not flow directly from wealth, where can we find it? Well, this has been a topic of speculation for quite some time. We can look back to ancient Greece, where many philosophers offered their perspective on where we can find happiness. For instance, some argued that happiness is not just a product of luck or fate, but might come from where we focus our mind. Others suggested that happiness might come from the pursuit or the enjoyment of things that are good and beautiful. Others suggested that it might be in the practice of everyday and larger virtues. As religion, philosophy, Christianity in particular started to grow, the ideas started to consider that virtue perhaps alone was not enough, and that maybe what we needed in addition was faith and a relationship with the divine. And even more recently still, through the Age of Enlightenment, people thought that happiness might be experienced through the pursuit of utilitarianism. Now, all of these are really interesting perspectives and sometimes often offer competing approaches, which can be a little bit confusing. I think I'm going to muddy the waters a little bit more to suggest that science offers a new and additional, but I think very informative approach. In fact, the new science of happiness suggests that rather than prescribe the conditions, the characteristics, and the motives of a happy person or a happy life or good pursuit, we can actually investigate this empirically by assessing their well-being and their happiness. And in fact, this rests on the assumption that happiness can be measured, and it can be measured in meaningful and objective and reliable ways. Now, there are many ways to do this. This could be assessed by people's brainwaves by looking at their neural function. It can be through peer reports. We can ask friends and family to tell us how happy someone might be. We can even look at people's facial expressions. And all of these are useful ways to triangulate on how someone might be feeling or doing. But some scholars have argued most recently, and this is one approach that you'll see the World Happiness Report adopts, is that perhaps the easiest and most appropriate way to measure this question is to ask people directly about how it is that they are experiencing their lives. And so as I mentioned a second ago, this is what the World Happiness Report does, using large-scale data from the Gallup World Poll. Hundreds of thousands of people are asked every year to answer this question put forward in the Cantrell ladder. So it says, please imagine a ladder with steps numbered from 0 at the bottom to 10 at the top. The top of the ladder represents the best possible life for you, and the bottom of the ladder represents the worst possible life for you. On which step of the ladder would you say that you personally feel at this time? So this question is posed to, like I said, hundreds of thousands of people in countries around the world every year. Now, the benefit of this approach is that it allows each person to rate their own life as they see it. In turn, what this means is that we're not estimating how happy someone might be based on their objective circumstances or what we might prescribe as happiness, but it allows each person to provide an assessment of their own, and it's not simply a substitute. For instance, as a function of their GDP, their marital status, their age, etc. Another benefit of this approach is that we're able to ask, or the Gallup World Poll has asked this question to a large sample with the same question each year, which allows scientists and some of our co-editors at the World Happiness Report to calculate average levels of happiness within nations over a period of time. And that we can use to kind of average and identify and understand how happy people within a nation are doing. Now, using these reports, one of the main features of the report each year is in Chapter 2, where the average happiness levels collected from each country that are taken across a 3-year average are ranked. Here are the top 23 from last year. So you can see Finland at the top, Costa Rica at 23. Italy came in at 31st last year based on the average levels of life satisfaction reported by Italian citizens. This is the third highest placement that Italy has reported in the 10 years of the World Happiness Report since it was first published in 2012. Now, in addition to these rankings, which often stir a lot of attention, perhaps one of the next most sought after questions in the report is how do we come to understand the variation in these happiness levels across nations? I think the 4 top predictors, or the first 4 predictors listed here, might be the usual suspects that most people think about when trying to understand what predicts people's happiness. So as you can see, GDP per capita does matter. It's not irrelevant, but it's not a perfect predictor either. People's experiences of corruption in their daily lives, whether they feel a sense of physical health, if they feel free to make their own personal decisions, all of those matter. But the last 2, I think, are social factors that many of us might overlook when we try to understand what matters for our happiness. The first is a simple measure of social support, which asks people if they have someone they can count on when they experience tough times, just simply one person. And this is a huge predictor of well-being, and I think that's really important. The second, which is very near and dear to my heart, is generosity, and this is a simple measure of whether people have donated to charity in the past month on a simple yes or no question. And so I think we're coming to understand how variation around the world can vary and change over time, but also what factors might help contribute to it as we're understanding and identifying people's happiness reports. So how has happiness changed, or life evaluations changed, over the past 15 years for which Gallup data have been collected? Here are the average life evaluation levels presented in 3 different ways. The blue line shows the non-population weighted mean. So what that is just every country is listed at equal value. The pink line shows the average population weighted, but here based on population levels, so larger countries effectively have a bigger say in where this line is leading. And the greenish lime line shows happiness, again population weighted, but now with the 5 biggest countries of US, China, India, Pakistan, and Indonesia removed. As you can see, there's quite a bit of variation, but also it's not all over the map. What I think is important to notice is that there's a lot of variability by region. So in the past 15 years, Central and Eastern Europe have increased quite a bit, whereas Southeast Asia and North America, Australia, and New Zealand have declined quite a bit. So there's complexity in the details. I thought you might be interested in particular in knowing about Italy, so here are the data from Italy. As you can see, the trend is quite stable. There's not nearly as much bouncing as you can see in the global data. Life evaluations reached their lowest levels in 2012 and have increased quite a bit since. But even at Italy's lowest point in 2012, this was still above the global rates. So it's helpful to know that that's probably why they're close to the top in 30. So in closing, I just wanted to hopefully help set the stage for today's conversation, which is to point out that happiness, there's the science of happiness that is kind of alive and growing. It suggests that we do not need to perhaps rest upon imperfect proxies for understanding how people are living their lives, but that we can ask people directly and get reliable and helpful and scientific measurements of this question. And that's valid and important because we want to understand how people themselves are living their lives. It also helps us try to understand what help people lead happier and healthier lives. And that's desirable because we want people to experience this sought-after state, but also because happiness is quite an effective thing for predicting other things that we care about in life. For instance, happier people tend to enjoy higher levels of physical health. They tend to contribute to and enjoy more supportive relationships. They experience higher levels of personal achievement. They engage in more generous and pro-social behavior, and they're also more likely to help the environment. And so, as was already alluded to, this is a complex thing that we're going to be talking about, and many things are interwoven, but this is just one other beautiful feature, I think, of the data is that there's quite this virtuous cycle, such that many wonderful things in life lead to higher levels of happiness, and higher levels of happiness in turn foster many of those things. So thank you. Thanks. Sorry.
As you can see from the setup, this was not really planned, but I can't resist the temptation of asking Lara a few questions. Now, a lot of your work is focused on actually giving, and Italians are givers, carers, lots of volunteer work, and all the rest. Do you see this predisposition as a culture, as a country, possibly carrying over for caring for the environment? It's not a direct relation, but as a psychologist, how do you see this happening? And do you see it happening?
Yes, so I think there's some really interesting data that's emerged recently from a collaborator, Abigail Marsh, who's shown that actually various levels of generosity tend to coexist in various ways. So people who tend to give their time, also give their resources, are more likely to give of themselves in many ways. And giving to the environment, I think, is one facet of that.
And challenging to create consensus on the meaning of these key words, because then when you do a scientific research, it's a key word and has to lead to clear findings. How does one generate consensus over such potentially broad meanings, but also so specific? Do other sciences come into play? Yeah, how would that work?
Yeah, well, I think that's a large and complicated question. One chapter of this year's World Happiness Report was digging into the complexity of how different cultures define and philosophize, grounded in philosophy, think about happiness. For instance, some see it in more calm, peaceful states, restful states, whereas in North America it tends to be, and Europe, I think, a lot more of these activated states. But one of the beauties, I think, and one of the ways in which science has moved forward with some consensus is the Cantor ladder question really allows a similar assessment, but allows people to kind of impose their own assessment. And so, as you notice, it's asking people to imagine their best possible life, and it's not prescribing what that is. For some people, that might be millions and millions of dollars, and for some people, that might be lounging at home drinking coffee all day, and it might look very different. And so I think the consensus, at least in this survey and this report, allows people to answer a standard question, but impose their own meaning upon the interpretation of the question.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So now I can't have our host sit by himself. So should I sit on this side? Is this where you want me? We're at least a bit closer than we were a moment ago. So now we'll take a broader perspective on happiness to explore why and how the journey towards happiness is so deeply related to the health of natural and human environments, and what businesses can and are, in this case, doing to be part of the change that not only do we want, but we need to see happen. So I would like to ask Professor Jeffrey Sachs and Nadia Paleari to join Davide on stage, to join us. So planet, people, and prosperity, we know, are three key, essential, interwoven pillars of sustainable development. And Jeffrey Sachs is advancing our understanding of how to win the grand challenges of our time with a systemic approach that connects, and that not only does the approach connect areas of knowledge and sciences, but his personal experience has really given him the knowledge and the understanding of the complexities like maybe very few other people, because he is connecting areas, as I said, of sciences, generations, cultures, communities, industries, and institutions. And his outstanding experience in sciences of the environment, of society, and economy fuel the many organizations that he directs. He is holistically minded. I had a hard time with this definition until, through a friend, I received his newsletter just coming out of the Festival dell'Economia in Trento, and he used that word and made me very, very happy, because it is really, I guess, the one word we have to use to really foster this understanding of interconnected problems and interconnected solutions. Jeffrey Sachs is co-chair of the Regenerative Society Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization with the mission of developing the transition to a regenerative society through a systemic and multidisciplinary approach based on the synergy between business and science. He is editor of the World Happiness Report, director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, where he holds the highest academic rank. He is president of SDSN, which is the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, very important, which is a network, a member-based alliance, which has over 1,600 members in 47 networks across 137 countries. Previously, Professor Sachs was director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. He served as special advisor to 3 UN Secretary Generals, author of 3 best-selling books, and for over 20 years he taught at Harvard University, which is also his alma mater. So not only does his experience, but his perseverance give us really deep, deep hope. It's wonderful to have you here. Nadia Paleari is an innovation strategist and cultural diplomacy advisor for international institutions and companies, and her goal is to foster awareness and credibility and tailor action towards a regenerative society. She is founding member of the Italian UNCTAD Youth Action Hub and also the European Climate Pact. She is also European Climate Pact Ambassador for SDSN Youth. Her ambition is to empower young leaders of tomorrow, bringing young people to really work hand in hand with institutions and co-create the future that we want. And this is done in reference to the frameworks, the international frameworks, mainly the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and ESG. The world needs dreamers who do is not only her motto, but I would say it clearly defines her. Welcome, Nadia. Davide Bollati does not need an introduction, especially not in these circles. However, we are grateful to him for what he's doing in his company as chairman of the family-run company Davines, which is an ecosystem that, as you'll learn, has a lot to do, actually, with the pursuit of happiness. He is also a founding member of the Regenerative Society Foundation, and thank you for having us. So, Professor Sachs, Jeffrey, how do I call you?
Call me Jeffrey.
Jeffrey. As you wrote in your eloquent article for Sole 24 Ore last week, we have adopted many treaties and many global goals, but in practice, we still have not changed course. So I know it's one of those impossible questions, but I think you're the only man who can actually probably answer it. What does it take to rapidly change course? Especially because we have to frame all this in the situation that we are in today, which follows the publication of the report. We're now in a war. We have wiped away decades of certainly personal commitments, and I think it's admirable how you keep the fire alive, and how can you instill hope and help us really see a path forward.
Great to be here. Thank you very much, and nice to see friends. I wrote that reflecting that we are at the 50th anniversary of a very good book, Limits to Growth, and it's the 50th anniversary of the conference that book was prepared for, the UN Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm, which was the first time that the world's governments faced up to the fact that the economy and the environment are on a collision course. And it's been a long 50 years. And I mentioned in the article that when I was assigned that book, my professor, I was a first-year economics student at Harvard, and the professor said, "Don't worry about it. First, it's not a very good book. It was written by engineers. No, it was actually it was written by engineers, not economists. That was the first point. Second, the market will take care of it, because the book was about scarcity and growth on a finite planet and what would happen. And I was taught as a first-year student, well, the price, something's scarce, the price will go up, and then you'll do something different. And the third was, it was written by not only engineers, but engineers at MIT, and we were at Harvard, so that was, how could it possibly be taken seriously? And that has stuck with me for 50 years, because that was the first start of my miseducation. So in life, you get miseducated a long time, then you get educated, and you also learn from experience. And I've now had the chance to work in more than 140 countries, so I've seen a lot. And here's what I've seen. First, everybody on the planet, actually, people in their lives want a normal life. They want peace. They want economic well-being. They want to live in a community where they can raise their children. So the commonalities of humanity are very strong. People who try to divide us are doing a deep, deep disservice. We are, I think Lara would probably agree with me, psychologically primed to be divided, most likely, as well as united. It's probably true that when we were hunter-gatherer bands in the Pleistocene, there was enough intergroup conflict that us versus them was pretty deeply rooted. And we have lots of emotional responses to us versus them, and we can be primed to do a lot of hateful things or to hate others very easily. But the truth is, there is not a reason for that, any fundamental reason. So my latest thing is I'm just aghast at the US. I really am very unhappy that President Biden says that our great struggle in the world is democracies versus autocracies, or that our great stake is US versus China. It's not true. This is the biggest obstacle that we face. We are not divided on this planet if we choose to be united in common purpose. And I've yet to go to any place in this world, I don't care the religion, the race, the ethnicity, the language, I've yet to go to any place in this world where you can't feel common humanity and just the basics that you want to go into someone's house or have a dinner with them or break bread with them. And that is the absolute core of problem solving. We're wasting our time on war and division because maybe we're partly primed for that, but also because I know in my country, because we're ignorant of geography and ignorant of almost any other place. So I have Sachs's law, which is you're not allowed to bomb another country unless you can name at least 2 cities in that country. The United States would never go to war again. People have no idea. Ask an American, name 2 cities in Ukraine. They couldn't possibly do it. Maybe 1 in 10 could come up with Kyiv, but beyond that, no chance. Or in Russia, same thing. Maybe they could say Moscow, but none other. So we're just filled with ignorance. This is a big problem. And we're ignorant about a lot of things. And it's interesting that, you know, it's one of the great, I'm in a little digression, so I'll stop. But
no, I mean, now you understand why I'm in this horrible position. But we could listen to you for hours, so keep going.
It's something when you read it the first time, it's weird. But in the Platonic dialogues, Socrates says, nobody deliberately commits an evil. Evil is an ignorance, he says. And you read it and you say, oh, I know lots of people who deliberately do nasty things. And so it seems a little strange, and actually Aristotle didn't quite agree, and they had a lot of debate. But there's something to Socrates' position also, the idea that bad actions are a kind of ignorance. That's what he was saying at a deep level. Because what the Greeks really believed in thinking about happiness was that happiness was a kind of skill. and it's something that is cultivated. And the word virtue, actually, which we mean wonderful, meant excellence. So virtue, the Greek concept of virtue is an excellence. That's something that is you train for. Like you go train for a race, you train for happiness too. And what you train for is a good understanding. And the most important of all the virtues is what the Greeks called phronesis, which is practical wisdom. That you can have a contextual sense, that you can know this is the right thing to do. And also another of the virtues was temperance, which is also what Lara was talking about. That temperance basically was Aristotle's idea, or it was on the wall of the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. Medon Zagan, nothing in excess. Just keep calm and don't go crazy for wealth, don't go crazy for this, don't go crazy for that. Just that is what temperance is staying in moderation. So it is a kind of excellence. And to come back to the question, what's wrong with the world? What's wrong with the world is that, well, I think America's a lot what's wrong with the world, frankly, but what's wrong with America, aside from the fact that we're shooting people every day, including children, and it's just unbelievable. And in my neighborhood and everywhere right now. And something's wrong when you elect a psychopath as president like we had. But even when you elect a normal person like Biden, he's a very normal person. He's a nice man, actually, but he's really not guided properly. No. Because he's got the idea that the most important thing is American leadership and the alliance, and he doesn't know how to listen. So every part of the world, we divide. Even this week is a meeting of, I'm going to stop my rant in a moment, but even this week is a meeting of the Americas, so-called. So the first thing that the United States does is, okay, we're going to have a meeting of all the Americas, but not Venezuela, not Nicaragua, not Cuba. First thing. Are you kidding? It's crazy. That cannot be how to interact with people. That cannot be how to interact across nations. And then, very rightly, the president of Mexico said, if you're not inviting them, I'm not coming. And that led to the Bolivians saying, we're not coming. That led to the Guatemalans saying, we're not coming. El Salvador, I think, also was on the list that didn't come. So suddenly, what's supposed to be a get-together is a divide. Well, try to solve climate change in that kind of milieu. Try to solve climate change when the most important thing you have in mind is to expand NATO to Georgia and Ukraine. And you don't think that that's going to lead to a response? When Russia sees, and I'm sorry to say it, they're right. Russia was right on this. Yeah. Why should NATO surround us in the Black Sea? That's what they kept saying. We kept saying, we don't want to talk about that. That's none of your business. None of our business. We're surrounded by Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey. You want to add Ukraine and Georgia? No, thank you. Well, I don't approve of the war, but I also don't approve of provocations. And it certainly doesn't lead to climate change action, does it? It doesn't lead to anything constructive. Or to say that every day something about Taiwan, when the idea was keep things calm. There's one China, we agreed to that. Actually, the Taiwanese and the mainland agree to that. They don't agree who is the one China, but they agree that there's one China. So why is the United States, from thousands of miles away, provoking this every day? We shouldn't be. So this is what is happening, which is that we are in an us versus them world when we're in an all of us together reality. And we haven't been able to figure that out.
So I warmly invite everyone to go back and listen to the recording. It starts at 18 minutes and 38 seconds. Because so much of what you're saying is informed by the report. So we have the first ranking countries, which is where there is a high level of trust in institutions. There is the importance of the environment in fostering or not fostering happiness. Then there's a genetic conversation, which is fascinating, but environment seems to be prevalent over the genes. So there's common goals. There's this globalization of the concept. The report informs us that, and it's wonderful how it's laid out, that initially the thought was Eastern cultures will certainly be favoring balance and peace and harmony and all those so-called Zen or Taoist concepts. Instead, it turns out that those concepts, those feelings, those states of being are more felt in countries with high GDP, which are in the West and don't have anything to do with the East. So we are really in a global world where I think we're so close to coming together to exactly what you're saying if we were allowed to do so. So that's where I guess there's great hope in smaller organizations or communities. So I'm now actually going to undo the structure that I had and take this to Davide, because a company is a community. And it's a community that follows rules and where there is a direction given. And so in this ecosystem, how is the pursuit of happiness being carried through, and how do you see it foster collaboration, which is really what we need to accelerate?
Well, it's all about the scope of the organization, the purpose, why companies exist. In classic economic theory, the company exists to maximize return to shareholders. Then, when it comes to the situation we are living now, there are a lot of proofs that companies that have more of a stakeholder approach, companies that they are pursuing not only maximization of shareholder profit, but they look for triple bottom line, people, profit, planet, companies that have that are more connected to their communities, that are more generous with their employees, that are more that respect more the environment, are more resilient. They reduce the risk of doing business, and within the frame that Jeffrey was talking about before, limits to growth or growth within planetary boundaries, these are the companies that that have a future. I think that in this moment there is a big need for biophilia and big need for good government practices, good governance in general of the world, because it seems that the world is not well governed. There are lots of failures of very important bodies that should they should guarantee that the world is in good shape. For sure, here we talk about GDP. I think GDP is outdated. Since 50 years, we still use GDP. We should move on from GDP. As a Regenerative Society Foundation, we did we scanned all the different beyond GDP initiatives. We counted 25. There are some that are much more, I think, much more interesting and much more ad hoc, because they measure what counts, and not like GDP that measure lots of things that don't count much at the moment.
That in fact really harm the environment. Aside from not counting, they do count, but in the wrong sense. So
the thing is now, I lost a little bit of, talking about trust before, I lost a little bit of trust on human species. Yeah. So I think the human species, the Homo sapiens, needs a little bit of help. And somebody has to help us to plan more long term. I'm not worried about the planet. The planet will be fine. I'm worried about the human beings. That if we don't adjust things. We don't have more of a human ecology, and we reposition ecology and economy. Before it was economy. Okay, ecology doesn't have to disturb too much economy. Okay, ecology is okay, but as long as it doesn't disturb economy. Now I think we should turn it around. Economy shouldn't disturb much ecology, because otherwise we will be in trouble. And we see it quite clearly, because the interdependence is more and more clear. We go from one situation to the other. Now it's easier for all of us to connect the dots.
Thank you.
And it's worth mentioning that, of course, the word is the same, ecology and economy,
Yeah.
because it comes from the Greek oikos, which
home.
means home. So it is your biological home, it is your home, it is your enterprise home also. So it has all those meanings. And the oikomen, or ekumen, is all of humanity together, the ecumenical world. So it's all the same root. And if we abided by that, we would be understanding ourselves better.
Would. That brings us, okay, I'm hacking my own thoughts here, because that really is a problem based in education, but let's not go there yet. I will now turn to Nadia, because young people are stuck with a mess that they did not create, and it's deeply disempowering, frightening, frustrating. It can only generate lots of very bad feelings. However, we have access to unprecedented amounts of information and technologies. And clearly, when you are instead supported by your community, by your family, by your environment, by your school, you understand that you can be a change maker. And we have one here this evening. And I would like to ask Nadia to comment one thing that really surprised me in the report, meaning that life satisfaction, which is one of those key factors that people are surveyed upon, is in decline in her age group, and it's rising in people who are 60 and over. So how does that make you feel? And why do you think that is?
Well, actually, that's a great question, and I was not surprised to see that our life expectancy, in the sense, was declining, because we are facing a different challenge. We have a conception of the world which is very different from the generation behind us, because we were born, we can say, with this crisis, and so we became more holistic, to use a term that you used before. What does it mean? That our conception, our term, our idea of happiness is more interlinked with the environment that we live in. That comes with the oikos concept. What does it mean? That we know that each individual, each one of us, is deeply affected from the community that they live in, from the environment that they live in. And that, yes, we can use this term change maker, which has this hero narrative behind it, but in the end it means that everything that I do, everything that I say affects the people I live in, affects the people I interact with. And so probably this is why we are probably less optimistic as a generation, but at the same time we are more engaged, because we understand that if we want to see a difference, we have to be the difference. And that comes from very small action to very big ones. And so we need to act as a whole generation, as a community. We have this sense of correlation, of community between us that I really don't see in other generations. So the concept of happiness was very individualistic before. It was a concept of, I think about my own happiness. And then, if a lot of individuals are happy, they create a happy community. Whereas now I think that we're shifting the paradigm in a sense that I am a happy individual if I live in a happy community. And one that cannot come without the other. So that's why we see our generation rising most of the time, and we want to be change makers. And the change that we need to make is exactly in our mindset. And that's the first thing that we need to change, because otherwise, as the professor and Davide were saying, we still keep our narrow narrative. And so we will think about our country and what is best for our country, and we cannot see that it has consequence for someone else because we don't take in consideration what can be the instances, what can be the needs of other people, of other countries. And so that's why we keep on going down that line without realizing the impact. I think there is a lot of empathy in this sort of actions, and we need to change that.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I have a practical question. How much time do we have?
Enough?
No, I mean...
For what?
No, because I have so many questions. I'm just going to go on. When I have to stop, someone's going to shake me and say stop. It's interesting, the three of you touched upon one same key factor, which is we need to change, the way we need to change the way our brains are wired, really, in a way. We need to perceive ourselves as a global community. We need to be empowered, and many people struggle for many reasons. So the report suggests that on one hand, there's the genetic research, and going to what Davide was saying, we need to, I'm frustrated by Homo sapiens. If I can ask you three to answer from your own angle of experience, what you think that technologies and sciences can actually do. So do we want to be using stimuli of some kinds? And for Nadia, certainly the question will involve virtual reality and those tools to, they do rewire our brain. Those experiences act very rapidly. But what are the pros and cons in your perspective? And maybe more on the genetic front, education is also a rewiring and can rewire really fast. The challenge there is to change the systems fast, and that seems to be very difficult. But on the other hand, the SDSN does propose a host of tools. So I'll leave it open to who wants to start and try and the obsession is how do we accelerate our way into a regenerative mechanism of ourselves, of society, of our communities.
Well, I think generational change would be a very good thing to start with. And it's a little weird that we have a 79-year-old president, yes, and an 81-year-old Speaker of the House and a, I think, 79-year-old, I don't remember McConnell, but I think he's something like 79 years old. Come on. This is incredible. We used to, 40 years ago, I'm just realizing, but 40 years ago, we made fun of the Soviet Union that it had this geriatric class of Brezhnev. I don't know if these names even mean anything anymore, but you wondered how could they go on with all these geriatric leaders that could barely stand and so on. And it's a real thing. Actually, younger people know more about climate change crisis, the ecological crisis, that we have to change because you've been living with this for your whole life. And I don't know how easy it is to rewire the brain of a 79-year-old president and most of the leaders, Putin's no spring chicken, President Xi, nope. And you go around the room and you say, it doesn't really work. Also in Africa, by the way, it's a little strange, actually. The youngest continent by far, and so many people holding on to power at quite an advanced age, I would say. And this is a big part of the problem. It's just a substantive, cognitive thing. I don't want to go down the route of any rewiring by more mad scientists right now, because I like technology and I like science, but there's a little bit of craziness and danger to it. And it's actually not our real challenge. I personally think Aristotle got it right 2,330 years ago when he said good education, publicly provided, a good middle class so that the society is not stuck between the rich and the poor, good mentorship so you find people who can help, and good habit formation, because ethos in Greek is habit. And ethics is living a good life. And it's not a coincidence, because the idea is that you build the virtues, you build the arete, as they called it, by habit. But you get the habit not out of your own knowledge. It's by listening to Socrates prod you along, or a proper education, or following a good mentor. So those are good methods. But basically, I want our whole class of politicians to just move aside so we could, not that there are some awful younger people. Being young is no guarantee of getting it right in the United States, at least. We have some young, oh my God, don't even imagine it, politicians. But we really need a generational change also, because this is absolutely no way to run things.
Oh, thank you for reassuring us on the technology front too, because I mean, I think some people do really feel that, I mean, transhumanism is definitely a direction. I think there will be a divide, those who are happy to be part of the natural systems and those who are going towards being cyborg. I look like one, but it's just a phase.
No, but it's wonderful for someone who was paralyzed that you can do unbelievable things right now, unbelievable things to rewire, to get people to be able to move, to speak, and so on. But if Mark Zuckerberg wants to live in the metaverse, I can't wait till he goes to the metaverse and stop occupying my space so much, because it's crazy that we're going to live in the metaverse. Could we live in this
beautiful
world
planet
properly, honestly? And if they want to go to space, let them all go. One-way ticket. They can use all their wonderful technology. Keep going, we'll cheer you on. I promise. But we want to live on Earth.
Yes. Okay. Now to a younger Earthling. We want your perspective on this.
Yeah. I mean, I can totally agree on this last cheering of time and space travels. And at the same time, I think that you touched a very interesting point, and it's one of the things that I struggle with the most, because we talk a lot about technologies, and especially towards young people. We are always asking about technology, virtual reality, augmented reality. How can we use that, and how powerful can it be? And it can be immensely powerful. It is, of course, one solution that will grow and gather more and more importance. But I think that in the end, as everything, it's a tool. So whether it's virtual reality or a piece of paper, we can do the difference anyway. What's the point? That virtual reality is great specifically, for example, for education. It's great to come up with new solution for also testing alternatives of what we're currently do. I see the potential of virtual reality in education. Mm-hmm. It's great because we cannot just learn, but we can learn by doing with virtual reality. And one of the things that works most, especially for young people, is just not studying on books, but to study and actually practicing. So virtual reality is definitely one of the things that we need to use going forward. And also about testing and seeing alternative. I see the potential of virtual realities in urban sustainability, or in thinking about green cities. Cities will become, hopefully, more and more green. And the Internet of Things, in these terms, will be the solution that we need to watch out for. So there is a lot of potential, but as I was saying, it's a tool. And as every tool, it is neither good or bad, but it depends on the use that we do with it. So to me, we can go on and study and invest in technology, but it depends on what we do with that. And because of this, I also go back to what you were saying about the actual generation of politicians and the fact that most of the time we young people do not feel empowered, listened to, which is true. But I also see a lot of time that there is a narrative, a confrontational narrative. It's either you or us. It's like take away the old class of politician and let the new one bring the change. I don't think that this is really the solution, because the point is that we're facing a new kind of challenge. We're talking about habits, and habits are exactly the problem here, because we're facing new challenges, and we're trying to solve them with the good old habits, but here they don't work. So the problem is we have, as once again, completely changed our mindset, but we young people, we do not have the solution. We are eager to find the solution, of course, and you don't have either. And we're trying to ask you questions, to ask you for answers, which you don't have, and at the same time, it seems that we want to take over and that we have answers, but we don't. So the point is, we have to talk in the end. We have to create a dialogue, because it's not by excluding some parts of society that we're going to find a solution. The point is, as everything in human society has ever been created, it's been through confrontation, it's been through dialogue. So that's why we young people want to be involved in dialogue, because I've seen it with my activity. When young people were not just involved for the sake of being at the table, but they were actually listened to, they really participate, they brought their own solution, which most of the time, yes, they were innovative, because we have maybe weird approach for the old class. Well, then new frameworks, new idea, new methodology came up, and it was useful either for us, either for the old generation. So I'm sorry for saying old generation, maybe I should say senior, but you understood me.
The more experienced
The more experienced. But actually, it's true, we don't have your experience. We may be more innovative, but we lack the experience. So that's why we have to collaborate. And in the end, it's about creating intergenerational dialogue. And also international and local dialogue, because I see a lot of discussion happening on the international level, but they never reach the local. So there is this correlations, and once again, that we need to create.
As we see more and more that intergovernmental institutions, governments at the national level, or governments also at the local level, have less and less clarity. They are more and more in the short term, and they don't have a holistic view of things. I think that the role of companies, specifically a certain type of company that can present a holistic view of economy, like big cars, for example, can represent hope for this world. Economy is very important. If we can shift the economy towards a more long-term perspective, towards an ecological transition, for sure we can impact the world positive and give more hope at the local and at the global level. The governments and all those institutions, if we look around, in this moment is a bit discouraging, unless we see a lot of bad dictators, more or less bad. I never saw a good dictator. we should find good dictators that run governments with the same strength that governments run, that bad dictators run, but so that we rebalance. So while we wait for a good dictators to take over the world, the company, the private sector can play a role, and I believe very much in the power of the big curve movement that is growing every day.
Thank you. So now I'm going to make myself pass the word to the floor, because we have students and we have you, and I'm sure you have many questions. So go for it. Don't take too much time, or I'm going to jump in with more of mine.
Thank you. I would like to ask if you think that traditional indexes to measure well-being, such as the GDP, for example, can be actually replaced by new indexes that can also take in account measures such as sustainability or happiness, the level of happiness of people.
Who would like to answer?
I'll say a couple words about that. GDP is celebrating its 100th anniversary, 100th birthday, more or less, right now. It's a concept that was developed after World War I to measure the size of an economy. And I happen to have known the Nobel laureate Simon Kuznets, who was a wonderful and brilliant man who was one of the pioneers who got the Nobel Prize for this. And he was very old and I was very young at Harvard. And he would tell me very, very clearly, this is not a measure of well-being. This is a measure of the size of an economy. It was created for two main purposes. One, war planning. Because in World War I, when economies were mobilized, they didn't know what the resource base was, what could be produced, how to plan for that. The second purpose came in the 1930s with the Great Depression and the new field of macroeconomics, which John Maynard Keynes initiated, and the idea that you could look at an economy as a whole and then use various instruments to try to sustain full employment. So the purpose of GDP was not a measure of well-being. When, after World War II, we started to measure systematically the GDP of different countries, well, those who had a higher level were those that were deploying technology more and had longer life expectancy and many other desirable elements. And it remains true if I'm asked I want to know one statistic of a country. Well, actually, if I want to know one statistic of a country, I would probably ask, what is life expectancy? Because that's probably the most holistic possible measure encapsulated in one number. Because if it's low, it could be war, it could be pandemic, it could be poverty, but if it's high, a lot of good things are happening somehow. You're eating the Mediterranean diet and living a nice life and so forth. So that's one measure. If I want to know two, I would take GDP per capita as the second, because I know how many things are correlated with that. Correlated. Lara kept saying it's not perfect. It doesn't even barely hit the meter on many things. It's so far from perfect, it's not even the right the right baseline. It's just wrong on many, many things. But it is correlated with many things. It's correlated on average with the lack or presence of extreme kinds of deprivations. If I want to know a third measure, I'd probably go with the Cantrell ladder as the third measure, which is an average of how people feel about the quality of their life. And so that's not a bad thing. But the truth is, we don't have to stop at 3. We don't have to think that there's a magic single indicator. But we also don't have to chase something like GDP per capita as if it's the meaning of society or the key to the good life. And that became the way we talked about development, economic development, and so on for a long time. So what I like about the revolution that the fourth king of Bhutan started in 1971, and that is the spur of this World Happiness Report initiative, because it literally started in Bhutan and it was motivated by Bhutan's observation. Why do we have gross national product but not gross national happiness? And lo and behold, you could actually measure the happiness either by asking people or by looking at different dimensions that you think are important of a person's or a society's happiness. So GDP it's not nothing, and it is related to many things, but it's so far from even close to everything that it should be understood for what it is. It's a measure of the size of the economy or the average output per person if you put it in per capita terms. But what's output? We know it misses a lot of points. The output could be horrible stuff. It could be polluting stuff. It could be nature destroying stuff. It could be stuff that just goes to Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and not to 100 million other people. So we know that it can't be right to follow that. So having a range of measures and broadening our mind, but happiness should take a special place in one sense, that all these measures are measures of things, but happiness, at least in concept, is a measure of purpose.
Yeah.
Why? What are we doing it for? And that's what Aristotle, he's my guy. I like him. That's why I keep mentioning him. That's what Aristotle said, that what is it that is the good to which all other things aim? And he said it's eudaimonia or evdaimonia, which we translate as happiness or as thriving. But it means that when we think about how a company should act or how a government should act, the idea of thinking about act in a way which makes life as worthwhile and rich as possible is not rich in that sense. Worthwhile and as satisfying as possible is what we should be after. And if that's a tricky question, it at least narrows the scope a lot, because it tells you a lot of things we shouldn't be doing.
But many governments, they use GDP to shape their economic policies, and unfortunately, again, there have been more than 20 different indexes that have been proposed in different times in different zones as alternative to GDP, like for example, Better Life Index or OECD, or even in Italy, Benessere Equo e Sostenibile, BES. But none of those new alternative indicators have taken the stage. So GDP is hanging there quite. I don't know why, but it's hanging there.
No, building on that, I agree, and probably it's because, as both of you were saying, is because there's nothing wrong with GDP itself. Like, it completely fulfills its purpose, but the point is that right now it's not enough anymore. GDP, as a professor was saying, was specifically helpful in the aftermath of war. So in a post-war era in which we had to rebuild economies, rebuild countries, and so that was probably the most effective indicators that we could use. But today it's not enough anymore, because we're taking into consideration other factors, other purposes. And so what is GDP lacking is the fact that it just measures an economy, the well-being of an economy. So if an economy is growing, that's what we can get from a GDP, but we cannot get if an economy is flourishing in a sense of thriving. A country can have a very high GDP, but still it can have many inequalities inside of it. So that's not an economy, a country that it's prosperous, because it is very unbalanced. So what we're looking now is not just for growth in economy, because we already grow a lot in the last decades. What we are looking for now is for economies that thrive. We talked about sustainable development, and I think it is one of the key that made GDP not sufficient anymore. Sustainable development is about, and here I'm using United Nations motto, leaving no one behind. So GDP is useless if we want to leave no one behind, because it's not taking that into consideration. So we can, of course, use GDP, but as the professor was saying, we have also to take into consideration other indicators, other factors. And we don't really like that, because most of the time, we just want to see a number. We want something that tries to say it all with a number. Probably right now, we don't have it yet. We have to still consider a lot of indicators, and maybe we will come up with a new factor that will replace GDP, because as you were saying, right now is still the most important one. But for now, I think that we have to consider and to understand that we have to consider different indicators, as GDP is just one of them. And it's completely fine, it's useful, but at the same time, it's not enough. So
how we feel is quite relevant, and in the end, that is not certainly measured by GDP. Are there other questions? Or
I don't know if do people know what Robert Kennedy said about GNP? No, because it's probably the most beautiful, succinct words
it really is.
said. I want to read them. He was a very special person, and he was killed this week, 54 years ago. And in a speech that he gave just before his assassination at University of Kansas, he said the following, which is incredible words. He said, too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product now is over $800 billion a year. But that gross national product, if we judge by the United States of America by that gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwood and the loss of our natural wonder in chaotic sprawl. It counts napalm and counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. It counts Whitman's rifle and Speck's knife, two murderers of the time, and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America except why we are proud that we are Americans. If this is true here at home, so it is true elsewhere in the world.
Could not have a better way to wrap this up. That's amazing. I really hope everyone reads, but reads really allowing this report to satiate so much curiosity. It is so revealing on so many fronts. It really, and it's also a good read, which is so important in the world of communication today. Usually reports are not good reads. This is also a good read. So please, please read it. Do we have other questions?
I have a question for Dr. Sachs. You have been here a couple of years ago, and I just want to get a sense of where we are. Are we forward or backwards since? Are we moving forward or backwards since 2 years that you are here? I know it's...
Well, look, this has been 2 of the worst years on the planet. And we have a pandemic, which I think there's some real chance came out of a laboratory rather than out of nature. And I'm very concerned about that we are not even looking honestly at that question. And we have a war that should have been avoided, but wasn't avoided, and is today raging not so far from here. And with all sides saying we don't talk, we continue to fight because we're going to beat that son of a bitch, whoever the other side is. And this is awful and dangerous. And next time when I'm here, I hope I say, well, that was, that was when the fever broke, because we saw what a disastrous course we were on and we cleared our heads. And that's absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible. We don't know. It's the world is not in good shape right now. And the world is not being properly led right now. And we have dangers. We have a war here, and we have dangers in Asia that are also similar, that could erupt into a war that would be absolutely devastating. And yet, at a fundamental level, none of it makes any sense. It's not true that Putin is Hitler, so there's nothing we can do except fight him to defeat. The whole imagery and everything is wrong. We didn't need this war. We could end this war. We don't need conflict with China. We could actually sit down and talk about things and really get away from this terrible danger that we're in. But are we better or worse than 2 years ago? We're worse, for sure, because we're in a war right now, and we're in a dangerous environment, and we hardly hear a way out. And by the way, I want to really congratulate Prime Minister Draghi for putting the idea of a peace plan on the table. And the United States, why are you talking about that? But he made a big contribution with that, because once it's on the table, you can't take that away. People heard it. And what we really need right now is Prime Minister Draghi and President Macron and Chancellor Scholz, the three, to say, we're right here in Europe, and we know we need peace. We don't want escalation. We need peace. We need to solve this thing. We told you, those three countries, told the United States in 2008, don't push NATO into the Black Sea region. It's dangerous. But the United States didn't listen. And so things could be much better soon. But right now, it's a very nerve-wracking period.
And this is such a wonderful example of how holistic, informed conversations are necessary. I think media has a huge role in really creating deeper polarizations, not favoring open conversations. People should be allowed to speak frankly, to speak their thoughts, their feelings. Instead, we are forced into cubbyholes of opinions.
But it's something is so wrong with the social media.
Yeah.
Because if you scroll under any article anywhere, it's horrifying.
Yeah.
Everything is the maximum snark imaginable. There's no discussion. There is no analysis. It is, I read the Financial Times each day, which is a pretty sophisticated newspaper, but the conversation beneath it is unbelievable. Because if somebody says something that someone else doesn't like, it's, oh, well, the trolls are out, or go back to Moscow, or do this. Come on.
Yeah.
And I think one of the key points is, and what I mean by that is that if you say anything that is not the party line here or there, you're accused of being a traitor, you're accused of being on somebody else's side or somebody else's payroll. And one of the big problems, in my view, is that people are anonymous on social media, and they're encouraged to be. Why don't, if you want to participate, name, address, who you are, and then participate as human beings. But then you're responsible for your words. So watch them a little bit.
Well, unfortunately, people who now have the courage of saying what they really think, before they even have the chance of taking responsibility, they're accused of being horrible people. So that's, you know, the other side of the coin. Anyway, we could go on and on. I would like to end with a question which is open to everyone here. Is faith a choice?
Is what?
Faith a choice.
Faith.
Faith. Faith. Having faith. Believing.
Of course.
Are we believers? Are we a room of believers? Are we skeptical? Are we scared? Does how we feel, is how we feel ruled by our faith, which can make us wake up the next morning and think there is a possibility to overcome the situation we're in?
Let me say the following. After a number of years of reading a lot of philosophy and a lot of theology over the last 2,000 years, the best philosophy and the best theology, and it means also whether you're secular or religious, in my view, doesn't enter this particular question and this particular issue in the following sense. The debate over 2,000 years is between various thinkers, philosophers, theologians, and so forth. Are we doomed, or is there hope? And I'm definitely in, or is everything all good, as Dr. Pangloss said, because we live in a world of beneficent providence. And both a group of theologians that I like, starting with Jesus and Aquinas, and a group of philosophers that I like, of which Aristotle is, I think, key, is that we're both good and evil. We're both capable of wonderful things. We're both and bad things. We're both capable of social cooperation and the worst kinds of impulses, and that our job is to build something positive. That's our job. That's what gives a good life. That's what leads to happiness. That's what makes the polis, the civic society, possible. So I don't think, when you read 2,300 years of this, by the way, you realize it's not going to all be wonderful next year. This is humanity, that we should be pushing for better things, and they can be achieved. And if you don't push for better things, things can absolutely get worse and spiral downward. And so that's our job. I don't expect for the ultimate perfection in this, but I think it's a great place to aim, because it gives you a good direction. And that's no matter, I think it's no matter how you define your faith, the idea that we can make a better world, I don't see how that could be denied, possibly.
And it's what pushes us to evolve, probably, right?
And I think it's what makes life interesting, after all, to aim for that. That's what we're trying to build. Definitely. So it makes it fun.
Yeah, I mean, that was no easy question at all. And I totally agree. And in the end, I think that there is one phrase that came to my mind when you were asking this question, which probably most of us have heard before, and it is that whether you believe that you can do something or you cannot do something, either way you're right. And it's a very shareable quote for social media, but at the end, the concept, it's very true. And it comes from a concept that I really believe in. At the beginning, you were saying that I'm a dreamer who does, you know. And I really believe that, and it comes from this phrase, this Latin phrase, which is homo faber fortunae suae, which is, it's the man that creates, is the maker of its own fortune, of its own destiny. And it's not about having faith or not. It's just that it's really residing in each one of us. And if we have faith, of course we can believe and act through that. If we have not, we can do it either way, but it resides in the human being itself, and that's in our hands. And whatever we do with that, then it will lead to a purpose and to a goal.
Thank you. That's very
So let me ask you also on a philosophical level. Pascal was a mathematician. When they asked him, do you have faith or not, he was calculating. He said, okay, out of calculation, it's convenient to have faith. Because if you win a big prize. If you lose, you don't lose anyway. You don't lose much anyway. So mathematically, yes, it's good to have faith.
Anyone want
Pascal's
to
wager.
add? Exactly. Anyone want to add their feeling on faith? No? Any burning question to ask, or no? So thank you all very, very, very much. Thank you.